My greetings and respect to the representative and ministers and officers from state government Karnataka, and and also many friends who came from all part of world, and also the Tibetan people at the local Hunsur Reptiling settlement. So we have been celebrating the Nobel Peace Prize Day for many years, and today also the time has assembled very well with the teachings at the Gyumey Monastery, and also the 26th anniversary of the Nobel Peace Prize Day. And Gyumey Tantric Monastery is one of the most advanced learning center which preserve the teachings of Buddha and Lama over many centuries. So the teaching here at the Gyumey Monastery this time and 10 December, the Nobel Peace Prize Day, happened to be the same time. And also the girls and boys you who have given a great performance this morning. And I think there is an old lady who teach the children, the boys and girls, about how to sing. And I wanted to thank that old lady for her kindness. So if we speak from the religious point of view, so we all assemble here today due to our many prayers and our karmic realizations. But if we speak from the fact point of view, we all have worked very hard and make effort together over the years. And I really appreciate your enthusiasm and that you have been working so hard for all the years. So yesterday actually we decided to make the ceremony inside, and so most of the people are sitting outside except for a few senior monks inside. So we decided that if we do the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony outside, so I will be able to have an audience, greater audience with the general public. So we decided that this morning. So even in that short time, so you have done a great arrangement, and I wanted to thank you for it. And we have here today the guests from state government, the minister, and also the member of parliament, Mr. Manjunath. And you have all been for many years, been very kind and helped to Tibetan people. I wanted to thank you. So Karnataka state used to be known as Mysore state before, and in 1956, on the 2500th death anniversary of Lord Buddha Parinirvana, I also came here along with few other places, and I also came to Mysore at that time. So at that time, the chief minister of Mysore state was Mr. Lingaraja, and he is a very old friend, and he has a keen interest and special Ninja Lingapa has a keen interest and a special connection and care for the Tibetan people. And I returned back to Tibet in 1957. And of course, after that, the uprising happened in 1959, and we were compelled to or forced to return back to India as a refugee. So it has been many years since we became refugee in India now. So for the long-term purpose, we thought that it's important to do the good settlement of the Tibetan settlements in India, and uh, also to build education institutions such as schools. So these two were considered as the primary importance at that initial stage. And at that time, among the many states in India, uh, the then Prime Minister Nehru, he has requested a few states to allocate space for Tibetan settlements. And here, the Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, has written letter to a few chief ministers and their office for who wants to offer land for Tibetan settlements. So among the many letters that he received, so Mysore State was one of the primary and primary one which offers the largest area, the land for Tibetan settlement. So therefore, now we have one of the biggest Tibetan settlement located or settled in Karnataka state. So within a short span of time, the settlements were all built up. And now in Karnataka, how many refugees are there? How many thousands? About 30,000 Tibetan people in Karnataka state alone. So around 30,000 or more who are permanently settled in different settlements in Karnataka. And also, along with that, in Karnataka, the Buddhism in general, and especially the Nalanda tradition in particular, and Shandarakshita, who is one of the greatest scholars from Nalanda and who have been of great service to Tibetan Buddhism in Tibet. Of course, his encouragement and his kindness is something not need to mention. And to bring Buddhism to Tibet, and especially the Nalanda tradition, Shandarakshita has played a great role. So Shandarakshita is the primary Nalanda scholar who first bring the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism to Tibet. And in Tibet, for over many centuries, under the teaching of Shandarakshita and his teachings and tradition, we Tibetan people and the monasteries have been studying different philosophical schools, fostered and enhanced and grew under his tradition. And we have this tradition of memorizing the root texts, then also memorizing the commentary texts, and also debating and doing philosophical, very intensive and critical debate about the different verses and the sentence. And Tibet is a place not only the Nalanda tradition of not just one part of Nalanda tradition's study, but also the Mahayana tradition and also the Vajrayana teachings of Buddha also came to Tibet, and which has been restored. And this is a kind of a prime rare treasure of Tibet. Generally, Buddhism is very precious, valuable item thing in the world. We can even call that Buddhism is the common treasure of the world, something that we all have to be careful and preserve it. So if we have a big temple and which is empty, it won't be of any use. Even though you may have built huge statues of Lord Buddha, there is nothing much that you can achieve out of it. So maybe it is precious, but the statue of Buddha cannot speak and give you teaching. Maybe those statues will last for a few thousand years, but within that period, it is impossible that these statues will ever speak one word. So, therefore, the most important is whatever the teaching of the Buddha, and within that, the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and within the three jewels, the Dharma jewel has to be understood clearly. And the path among the Four Noble Truths, the path that Lord Buddha has shown is the Dharma jewel, which need to be studied and practiced. And having studied as foundation very clearly of all these foundation level of studies, then one should study the Vajrayana and the Tantric studies. So therefore, the great learning centers of Tibetan Buddhism and Buddhism are very important. And those were the main resources of teaching, the preservation of Buddha's teaching in Tibet. And in 1959, when the uprising happened, so after that, only a handful of those great scholars managed to escape into India. And so if we need to preserve the tradition of Buddhism, now we need to preserve those handful of the scholars that we have. And that was the idea that we had at that time in after 1959, after coming to India, that we need to preserve and foster those intellectual persons if we have to preserve the tradition of Buddhism for long. So therefore, we started to establish the monastic institutions in India. And also we haven't paid much importance to establish all monasteries, but only a few ones. And among those few monasteries that we paid importance, the Gyumey Tantric Monastery is one of them. And once we came to a refugee in exile, so the host, the Indian government and the people are the one who really took care of us and provide us all the support to establish ourselves firmly in a new place. And also after Mr. Lingarajaba, the subsequent chief ministers and the ministers have been very kind to Tibetan people. And today we have the public work department minister here, and also the members of parliament. And they were asking me what they can do for the Tibetan settlements here, and whatever is possible. So they were ready to offer and extend their assistance in whatever field that we may need. So therefore, we all, the Tibetan people, should remember the kindness of Indian government in general, and especially to the Karnataka government. And we wanted to thank them. So I think so. I was also awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So when the announcement was made uh, of my awardment of the Nobel Peace Prize, so there was a kind of a conference. And the next morning, there were a few media persons and who came and asked me and told me that even though I got the Nobel Prize or not, I'm a simple Buddhist monk, and there is nothing change in me, even though I've already got the Nobel Peace Prize. There is nothing that I will go beyond that, or nothing less as before. So even though the Nobel Peace Prize is a huge title, but I have been always in very consistent in my approach towards humanities and any kind of work, and I'm very deeply through the approach of non-violence and peace. And I feel that my approach of the non-violence and peace and the message of the peace got a kind of a recognition in the award of Nobel Peace Prize. That's why I felt very happy. Otherwise, there is nothing that I can gain from it. And I always have the feeling that I am a bhikshu, even in my dreams. So even if I think about that I'm the Dalai Lama or the leader of Tibetan people, the spiritual and the political, then there is nothing else. Even though the political and the religious leader is already changed now. After 2011, I have completely retired from the political responsibility. As I have said yesterday, the most important is that we all have to work hard during this critical time. And we have also worked very hard for last many years. So that is the result that we have been a refugee for almost 50 years. We are different, something different from the rest of the refugees in the world. And one primary thing is that we have been able to preserve our religious traditions and culture. And among the different traditions, and even among the Buddhists, Nalanda Buddhism, Nalanda tradition is a very peculiar and unique. And Buddha's teaching is not something that you just have faith or devotion to Buddha. So, but Buddha's teaching need to be analyzed. You need to investigate, put into critical analysis, and after the end of all your investigations and analysis, if you find something fruitful, something that you could trust and gain some result, then that is how you have to follow the teachings, and that will be beneficial. And among them, the Nalanda tradition in Tibet is one of the primary and the prime teachings of Buddha. In the last 30 years, I have started a negotiation and dialogue and discussion with the modern scientists. When I engage in the discussions with the modern scientists, of course, I myself gain a lot of knowledge in terms of the external world and so on. There is a lot that we as a Buddhist scholar can gain a lot from the modern scientists and science education. But as a practitioner of Nalanda tradition, there is a lot that we can give to the modern scientists, especially in terms of the mind and consciousness and the psychology. So when it comes to religions, in terms of Tibetan, it is something a kind of a private matter. But when you study the Buddha's teaching, whether they are religious or not, whether they have faith or not, but if they benefit or help someone, it is the benefit. There is no harm in doing that. whether they have faith or not. So nowadays we find different peoples in societies in the world who are neither religious or not have any faith, but they're still studying the Buddha's teaching. So the time is gone where we say that the teaching is precious and that we need to preserve it. That is, the time is over. Or through the anger or through the frightening people out of fear to do teachings or to follow a tradition out of fear is all the time is over. And the psychology studies coming from the Nalanda tradition, and also the different categories of the mind and consciousness and the philosophical systems are something a treasure of the world. And now all these treasures in the studies are preserved and maintained well in Tibetan script and language. And those kind of knowledge and the wisdoms, even in 21st century, we are able to connect with the modern scientists and the people through the wisdom and the knowledge that we found or studied about 3,000 years back. And this is something very wonderful. So nowadays, the Sanskrit is almost a dead language. So there is only a few scholars that can speak and write Sanskrit. And among the many languages in the world, the only language which can preserve and explain and present the entire teaching of Nalanda tradition is only the Tibetan script and language. And of course, the Tibetan masters and scholars have worked hard over many generations and over hundreds of years. And now this is something that we can be proud of to other people and feel rejoiced for ourselves. So this is something that I wanted to express today. And the guidance and advice coming out of the Nalanda traditions are something which are helpful and beneficial to all the people. And I'm sure that within the Tibetan community, many more people will come who get Nobel Peace Prize in future. So that's my wish and ambition. Thank you.